So my challenge on the Sunday before the Christmas candle lighting is not to steal my own thunder, and not talk about what we're going to talk about at the Christmas candle lighting service on Wednesday at 7 and 9. I feel that's our most sacred service of the year. Reverend Mark and Reverend Nadine and I, we love doing that. We tell the Christmas story, and then I do a little metaphysical interpretation about how that story is actually relevant in our life today. We sing lots of Christmas carols, and we have an extraordinary band that's here, and it's just a great night. So I hope you will join us for that on Wednesday at 7 and 9. That said, there was a pope who was very, very much beloved by the people. He happened to be Polish. He passed away, and the College of Cardinals gathered to elect a new pope. And you know, because the Vatican City actually is in Italy, there are a large number of cardinals in the College of Cardinals who elect the new pope who are Italian. So these Italian cardinals always are hopeful that there will be a next pope who is Italian. And as it turned out, when the election was done, the new pope was Irish. And so it was what it was, but you know, as things turn out, it seemed that this new Irish pope, his heart was failing him. And so the doctors said, well, you know, if we can just get you a new heart, you will have many more years to be the Pope. And so all of the Italians in the College of Cardinals said, now what would be really great is if we can get an Italian heart. So we can get some Italian into this Pope. Because at least he'll be an Irish Pope, but he'll have an Italian heart. And so they said, well, how is that going to happen? And they said, well, you know, when the Pope does the Angelus, he comes to the balcony and he does a blessing for the crowd in St. Peter's Square. He said, what we will do is we will release a white feather, and whoever the feather lands upon, that's the person that God has selected, and it will be an extraordinary blessing for them, because almost everybody in the square is Italian, and they will be the person who gives their heart to the Pope. What an extraordinary thing. What a blessing to be the one selected by God to give your heart to the Pope. And so they let people know, you know, how this is going to go. And on the given day, St. Peter's Square is just filled, and the Pope comes out onto the balcony, and he's very, very frail. And he does the blessing, and one of the cardinals comes onto the balcony, and he releases the one white feather. You know? And people are chanting. This organic chant comes up from the people. Pope, take my heart. Pope, take my heart. Pope, take my heart. And the feather starts to float down, and the chant becomes, Pope, take my heart. Pope, take my heart. Okay. These are all the things I cannot say on Christmas Eve, though. So, you know, in metaphysics, I find that there is this confusion for people, and so I just thought I would address that quickly today and say, you know, that I think it's incorrect in metaphysics to say, I am God. That implies that you created the universe. Now, what we teach in the science of mind is that the same power and love and intelligence that did create the universe exists within you, but you personally had nothing to do with, you know, turning seeds into flowers or making universes and solar systems. Really, tell the truth. That was not your doing at all. There is something somewhat greater than you, of which we are certain you are a part. It exists everywhere, and it exists individualized within you. So the truth is, I am not all that God is, but all that I am is part of God. So I just like to get that little piece of identity squared away as we come into the end of the year, and here we are, season of light. You know when God brings you something again and again and again, and you know, this is supposed to get my attention. This, you know, and if you don't pay attention to it, it comes around again, and you don't pay attention to it, and you think, oh, not now, please, I have so much to do, and it comes around again. This is It's a Wonderful Life for me. The movie just plagues me. It's always on, isn't it? I mean, it's always, always on. I cannot get away from Jimmy Stewart. And so finally, I thought I will just surrender into this and see what does this have to say for me. Clearly, God is trying to get my attention with It's a Wonderful Life. And so I will try to watch with new eyes and see something I've never seen before and hear something I've never heard. And you know what? I got it. I absolutely got it. In It's a Wonderful Life, George needs to have a shift in his life. He needs to really understand his bigger purpose. And what does it mean to have a wonderful life? So hold that over there for a second. Now over here. So this young fisherman goes fishing and he sees this old guy who's been fishing in the same spot for decades and decades and decades. And he watches him and he notices that he does something really, really interesting. That when he gets a big fish, and he gets lots of fish, when he gets a big fish, he unhooks it and he throws it back into the water. But when he gets a smaller fish, he holds it against this little broken ruler he has. And if it's the size of the ruler or smaller, he puts it in his cooler to take home. And he thinks, this is really strange. What's with this? Usually you want to keep the big fish, right? And get rid of the little fish. And so finally he can't stand it anymore. And he goes to the old fisherman. He says, I got to ask, what are you doing? What do you know that I don't know? You've been fishing for years and years and years. What gives with this? Are the big fish tough? Do they have big bones or too many bones? It's hard to eat. What's the deal with the big fish? You are always throwing the big fish back. And he says, see this ruler I have here, this broken ruler? It is broken to the exact size of my frying pan. So, I know that's not new. That's not new. But our frying pan is the size of the life that we know. Right? Our frying pan is the size of the life that we know. And I would even go so far as to say maybe even a reflection of the size of the God that we have. Right? That if I had a bigger frying pan, I would have a bigger God. If I had a bigger God, I'd have a bigger frying pan, for sure. Because life gives us ideas. This is the way God gives to us. We pray like heck. Oh, God, help me, God, help me, God, help me. And what does God do in response? God gives us an idea. God gives us inspiration. God brings opportunities. And we say, too big for me. Doesn't fit my frying pan. Too big for me. No, not now. Now is not a good time. I want things to be different, just not right now. Or my favorite, I want things to change. I just don't want to have to be the one that changes. My personal favorite there. God selected Moses, a very, very, very unlikely character, to lead the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage. When God says, Moses, you're going to do this, Moses is like, who, me? No, pick my brother. My brother is much more suited to this. Moses tells God, as if God doesn't know already, he says, I'm slow of speech. He stutters. Moses is a stutterer. And he thinks it's going to be really horrible leading millions of people, out of Egypt when I'm stuttering. That's a real challenge for him. He thinks, I am not up to it. Can't you pick somebody else? How could I possibly do that? But there's a spiritual principle that's revealed in this tale that's very, very important. And what it is the place whereon you stand. Where you stand, where I stand, is holy ground. The place whereon you stand is holy ground. That you live and you move and you have your being. This is what we teach in Science of Mind. You really do live and move and have your being in God. And simultaneously, God lives and moves and has its being in you. So, come back to It's a Wonderful Life for just a second. Poor George. He thinks, and I know many of us have had these days, these episodes in our life, he actually thinks, God, it would be better if I had never been born. Now, what's amazing is he gets a little slice of grace in this movie, and he gets to see what would actually have happened if he had never been born. He gets to see how the light within him has touched and made a difference in so many people's lives. But when he's in a bad place, like many of us, we think, oh, I wish I'd never, ever been born. He has touched a lot of lives, made a difference in lots of lives, just like we have. So the story I want to tell you this morning is about there was a father who was on a big business trip to Washington, D.C. And he landed, and as he landed, the stewardess came over the PA system and said, Lloyd Glenn, will you identify yourself that we have something very important, something urgent for you. And so he does, and the stewardess says to him, well, as soon as you get off the plane, there's going to be somebody there with a sign for you, and they have an urgent message for you. It's really, really important. So they get off the plane, and sure enough, there's somebody there holding a sign, Lloyd Glenn, and he says, you have to call this number. It's a hospital. It's urgent. And it's going to take you right into the desk in the intensive care unit, this number. And so he makes the call, and he gets the doctor. He says, this is Lloyd Glenn. Wait a minute, the doctor wants to talk to you. The doctor comes on, and he says, your 3-year-old son has been crushed by an electric garage door and is critically injured. He's unconscious now. You need to get back here as fast as you can. And so the dad says that the next 6 hours to get back home were the longest 6 hours of his life. And so he walks into the hospital, and he sees his son all hooked up to all kinds of machinery and beeping and tubes and people scurrying around him. And he said it actually made him feel physically ill to see this. And so his wife, of course, was there. And although she was upset, there was a calm that she also had simultaneously. And she just was so strong in knowing that he was going to be all right. And she didn't know why, but she just knew that he would be all right. Because it didn't look good. This little boy, whose name was Brian, his sternum was crushed. And so the damage to his heart was actually unknown at this time, but also the damage to his brain, because when the wife had found him, he was already clinically dead. And so she was there, she found him, and she opened the garage door, and she's screaming, and a neighbor, who just happened to be a doctor, heard her and came over and administered CPR to this little boy. They put him in an ambulance to take him to the hospital, and so they were all very concerned that there would be significant brain damage. And so for a day and a half, he was unconscious. And then suddenly, just all of a sudden, he just sat upright and looked over at his father and said, Daddy, hold me. And so the next day, they pronounced that there was no neurological or physical compromise at all in him. So this was great. So the family is filled with just this extraordinary joy and gratitude, and they get to take Brian home in a couple of days, and the whole family is just sort of like filled with this reverence for life and a love of God that comes to those people who sometimes have a really close brush with death. So everybody in the family gets closer. Brian has 2 older siblings, and they get really close to little 3-year-old Brian, and the parents are closer to all the kids. The whole family is just really like they know they've been through something, and what we have here is really special, and everybody is just really loving and tender and caring with each other. 1 month to the day after Brian's accident, he wakes up from a nap. Now, he's only 3 years old. And he talks in very short sentences. So this is really significant, the mom realizes, that he says to his mother upon waking from his nap, sit down, Mommy. I have something I want to tell you. Now, that was a big sentence for 3 years old. And so she does. And he says, do you remember when I got stuck under the garage door? It was so heavy and it hurt so much. And I called to you, but you couldn't hear me. And I started to cry. And then the birdies came. Birdies, says his mom. He says, yes, the birdies. They made this big whooshing sound and came into the garage, and they took care of me. Did they, says Mom. Yes, and one of the birdies came and got you, and she told you I was stuck under the garage door, and that's how you know to come look for me. Now, she knew that a 3-year-old really had no concept of death and spirit, and so he was referring to the beings that came to him from beyond as birdies, because to him they were birdies because they were up in the air and they could fly like birdies do. So she said, well, what do the birdies look like? And he said, oh, they're so beautiful. They wear all white. They're all dressed in white. Well, some are green and white, but mostly all white. And she says, well, did they say anything? And he said, they told me that the baby would be all right. And I said, what baby? He says, the baby lying on the garage floor. He said, and you came out and you opened the garage door and you ran to the baby and you told the baby to stay and not leave. And that was exactly what she had done. And she realized that, that his little spirit had left his body and was looking down from above. He says, well, then what happened? And he said, well, we went on a trip very far away. And he seemed kind of agitated because he didn't really have the language to articulate this experience that he had had, but it was clearly important to him. And he said, we flew up so fast in the air. And he said, and it was so pretty, Mommy, and there were lots and lots of birdies everywhere. And the birdies told him that he had to come back and tell everybody about the birdies and that the birdies were real. And so he came back to the house, and there was a big fire truck and an ambulance there, and a man was taking him, and he tried to tell the man that the baby would be okay, but the man couldn't hear him. And the birdies told him that he had to go with the ambulance, but they would be with him all the way. And he said, you know, they were so pretty and so peaceful that he really didn't want to come back. And at some point there, this bright light came. He said, and it was so bright and warm, and he loved the bright light so much, and someone was in the bright light and put their arms around him and said, I love you, but you have to go back. You have to play baseball and go to school and play with your brothers and tell everyone about the birdies. And so the person in the light kissed him and waved bye-bye. And then whoosh, big sound came, and they went off into the clouds. And so the story went on for an hour of little Brian telling his mother in tremendous detail everything that had happened to him. He said that birdies are always with us, but we don't see them because we look with our eyes. And we don't hear them because we listen with our ears. He says, but they're always there. He said, you can only see them here. And he put his little 3-year-old hands over his heart. He said, and you can only hear them here. And they whisper things to help us do what is right because they love us so much. And he said, I have a plan, Mommy. And you have a plan. And Daddy has a plan. Everyone has a plan. And so in the days and weeks and months ahead, he would tell the story or pieces of the story to different people, but it was always exactly the same. It never varied. And what would happen is that when people would hear him tell this, they would kind of soften and smile when they heard the story. And nobody ever tried to dismiss it or say this couldn't be so. And his parents said that we are not the same because of this. And I hope we never will be. So, you know, in the Old Testament, the prophet Jeremiah says, I know the plans I have for you. He's speaking, saying that this is what God says. I know the plans I have for you. Plans to prosper you. Plans to give you a future with great hope. That's God's plan. But you know, I think so often we don't think that's our plan. We think we must have some other plan, you know? And what that is, I realize, is that, you know, we're just in a period where our frying pan is particularly small. You know? Do we allow the experience to come in and through us, or do I keep my field of what I will allow into my life experience really, really narrow? So here's something that I'll say about the plan. That there's a plan that my personality me has, you know, what my personality would like. But then I think there's a plan that's more inspired, that comes from the Spirit of God within me. You know, and so the way I pray about this is I say, God, you know who I am. You know what my my talents are, my abilities, my likes, my dislikes. Use all that I have for your purpose. Because sometimes when I'm really just doing my plan, it's like pushing a boulder uphill. Do you know what I mean? It's like it just doesn't seem to be budging very well. In fact, I actually backslide a lot. But God, you know who I am. You know my skills, my talents, my abilities, what I have to offer. Use all of that for a purpose greater than me. In 1886, there was a young woman who had been diagnosed with a fatal tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, up until actually not that long ago, was pretty much fatal for everybody. And her husband, also a young man, her husband had a problem as a child and now had one leg that was completely withered, and it didn't fully grow. It was 3 inches shorter than the other leg. And later, she would write, they went to this lecture. And later she would write that leaving the lecture, she heard an idea that changed her perspective forever. And this is really the importance of an idea. I always tell people, when I read a book, I'm always looking for one idea. I don't need to agree with the whole book. I'm just looking for one idea because, one idea, one little truth can be the game changer. It can change everything. And what this woman heard at her lecture was, she said, I went in thinking I was a human being, and I left knowing that there was something divine within me, that I was, in fact, a child of God, just having this human experience. And as a child of God, I did not inherit sickness. Now, the human part of me was having the experience of sickness, but as a child of God does not inherit sickness. It is not part of a child of God's natural inheritance. That was a new idea, she said, that got a hold of me, and I was forever different. Several years later, that same young woman was totally healed. And her husband's leg had grown and was completely restored. In fact, it grew 3 inches to match the other healthy leg. And so Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were the founders of the Unity spiritual movement. You've probably read the little magazine, The Daily Word, that many of us read. So there is that within us that knows a greater truth for and about us. And when we align with it, the Science of Mind teaches us that that principal power and presence is freed to duplicate its divine self in us when we align with it. But if your frying pan is small, you don't give it a lot of room to work. You limit your experience. So if we look at our life, we can say that everything I have ever been through was all for me to wake up. The good, the bad, the stuff we'd prefer, the stuff we wish had never been on the menu in life. All of it was for me, for all of us to wake up. So I'm a spiritual being, you're a spiritual being, and Science of Mind teaches us is that your thought is what you have to work with to heal and grow and evolve your life. And that now is the time, or as I like to say, any time between now and right now is a really, really good time to think a God thought instead. The scriptures say that nothing is impossible to you, to me, with God. And what I know and what the Science of Mind teaches us is that God is right where we are. The God that we're going to get to know is right in here. Let's pray. So we turn our attention inward right now for a moment to recognize that we are surrounded and filled with an infinite, loving, intelligent spirit. It's God, the living Spirit Almighty, the truth within us. And so I know for each and every one of us that we are fully aligned with this principal power and presence today. And so we allow our hearts and minds to be wide open so that a greater purpose for us might come forward in the days ahead as we move toward a new year. I know that in this season of light, that we are illumined with what we are here to do, what we are here to be, what we are here to give in love into our world. And I know that absolutely God has the capacity to use everything that we have. And we are willing vessels. And it might not look anything like what we think, and it might. So we include in our prayer today our family members, our friends, our loved ones, and we affirm that right where they are, God is, fully present. We let our prayer be a blessing in the world, so particularly all those difficult situations that really pull at our heart, we say the perfect activity of God is right there, as healing, as peace, as understanding, as compassion, as all needs met. We bless our church, we bless all churches, synagogues and temples and mosques and ashrams, all paths to God. And I know we're blessed by being together, that we all get raised up, that we all get lifted, our faith gets increased. And so with an open, gracious, full heart, I give thanks and release this word, and so it is. Together we all say, Amen.